Are you wondering if the Sony ZV-1 camera is actually any good and if you should get it, or maybe you should get the ZV-1 Mark II or the F version? Well, I can say you straight away, out of all these cameras, the original ZV-1 I think is the best value for money and the best camera out there. So compared to the Mark II, you actually get much better lens on this camera, and really the processor on the Mark II and everything else pretty much is identical to this camera, but this ZV-1 in the user market really can be had for quite cheap. For example, I paid for mine a bit over 200 euros, so I got really good deal and mine looks pretty much brand new. However, what if you can't get it for cheap like I did? Should you get this camera? Well, I can say you straight away, do not get this camera. It's a complete waste of time if you already have a decent smartphone. And really I only got this camera because I got a great deal on it, and really I will probably sell it for a profit, as really it's pretty much pointless even if you compare to Sony ZV-E10 camera. When it comes to the sensor size, I think these cameras absolutely suck. So they do have 1-inch sensor, but really the sensor size when you compare to modern smartphones such as iPhone 13 up and like Pixel 6 and up and Galaxy S22 and up basically, it's only about a third larger than on a modern smartphone. So yeah, there's not much of difference really. When it comes to resolution, this camera can shoot at 4K up to 25 frames basically. So if you actually bump it to Full HD, you can actually get better frame rate basically. Okay, so as you can see, you can get 100 frames basically, but you need a better memory card than I have here. And the battery life on the ZV-1 camera is absolute trash basically. So it uses these very tiny batteries here. So, and when I actually shoot at 4K, I can get basically around 30 minutes of shooting time on this small battery. So this is what it looks like. So yeah, I think they claim that you can get like 40 minutes or 45 minutes, but in real life you're getting only 30 minutes of shooting time in 4K on these cameras, and that's completely ridiculous really. When you compare to the ZV-E10, which isn't really more expensive than this one, you do get like a bit over 1 hour of recording time on this one, so more than 2 times better battery life on the ZV-E10, and really the battery life is complete garbage on this camera. Comes to the ergonomics and ease of use, this camera again isn't really the best. So actually when I'm using it, I'm always kind of worried that I might actually drop it, and I do not have a good grip on this camera at all. So you can see just what kind of grip it has, so non-existent basically. Also, especially if you film yourself like this, so yeah, you have pretty good chance that you might actually drop this camera because you can't really hold it very well at all, and yeah, it really sucks. So as I do have these like sticks here which you can use, so you really need this stick basically if you want to use this camera for vlogging. Also, there is huge design flaw with this camera, so you can see where the tripod mount screw actually is. If you actually like have it on tripod, you really can't open your battery or a memory card slot basically if you have mounted it on tripod. So absolutely retarded design really. But in the Mark II of the ZV-1 they have fixed that. I think that's like the biggest improvement on the Mark II. They have moved this port basically over here, so you can actually access the door and your battery and the memory card. By the way, again, you will need to open your door quite frequently because the battery isn't the best really. And really this always does my head in, that yeah, I have to basically unscrew it from my tripod to actually be able to open it and do something. Absolute terrible design flaw. And just look how great it is on the ZV-E10. So I can open and access everything very easily even if you have it mounted on tripod. Another way how the ZV-E10 is better is it actually has a Type-C port. So for like transfers and also connections. So if you want to use it basically maybe as a webcam or stuff like that, this has a regular mini USB basically, micro USB. and this port isn't good at all. I think sometimes it's wonky, sometimes not connecting, transfer speeds are slow as hell basically. So yeah, I absolutely hate that they haven't included Type-C. So on this one I can connect it directly to my smartphone without any problems and transfer all the image and videos super fast. On this one it's complete nightmare basically, and often it lags, sometimes it doesn't properly connect. So yeah, this like old style USB completely suck on the ZV-1. And also another negative of this camera is actually the screen of it. So yeah, it's kind of pathetic really, but it's not the only problem with this camera, it's really problem with other Sony cameras as well. They are pretty much one of the best manufacturers when it comes to screens. They have such high-end TV screens and all kinds of screens, but they include absolutely terrible screens in these cameras. So you can't really understand the exposure and how actually the shot will look like. So yeah, it's complete garbage really. The screen also it's kind of small and really, but at least you can actually connect this camera to a phone basically. You can actually connect it to your phone and see what's actually happening, and you can also remotely control it basically. And then yeah, sometimes it lags, but for most part it works okay. So okay, yeah, so this was a bad example, but basically I really try to open the screen on my phone if I want to check for exposure and how it exposes and what it will look like, because again the screen on the ZV-1, it's absolute trash really. You can't understand anything, so you're just shooting blindly basically. Also another problem with this camera is it overheats like crazy. So I actually have set it up so to basically okay, so this auto power off temperature, you have to set it high, and still the camera will sometimes shut down on you even if you select the auto power off temperature on high. So in usage this camera really gets hot, absolutely piping hot, and if you don't enable this and shoot in the standard mode, yeah, you can maybe get 10 minutes of recording time before this camera basically gives up. Again, completely ridiculous. Then another thing where this camera completely sucks really compared to ZV-E10 even, again, which is not really that more expensive, like literally $100 more, is the autofocus. I would say the autofocus on this camera is absolute trash. So it's terrible autofocus really. So when I'm shooting myself, I'm not even sure if it even has like this A autofocus. So when you compare the focus lock speeds on both of these cameras, really this is like absolutely great camera for autofocus. This one is, I would say, it's complete garbage really. And if you want to focus on any objects, for example, again, if you need a good focus really, and if you're not shooting persons, maybe it can focus better if you shoot a person, but if you try to focus on any objects, especially if there are more objects in the frame, so it's really hard to get it to focus on anything that you want. Again, on the ZV-E10, yeah, it's actually pretty good, so I have zero complaints about this camera. Really, on this one, I'm not liking the autofocus at all. Also, another thing which I do not like about this camera is this product showcase mode. So actually, I purchased this camera because it had that mode and I thought it will be really useful for me, so I can actually record like videos and show the things while actually I'm being myself in the frame as well. But really this feature absolutely sucks really. It doesn't work properly. Actually, maybe it works too good. It simply focuses on the nearest object really. So it's really dumb, this system. So it's not properly engineered. So while on the paper it sounds it would be great, but in reality from my usage test I leave it off basically because yeah, it completely messes up the footage and it doesn't really focus where I actually need it. So I wouldn't purchase this camera for this function really. So this was like one of the biggest selling points for me, for example, why I actually even got this camera, because of this one. So I needed that function, but really when I started to use it, it's complete crap basically. And when it comes to footage compared to smartphone, really, yeah, just get a smartphone really. If you are just amateur who will use this camera in auto mode, your smartphone will do a much better job in auto mode. So a smartphone will give you way better dynamic range. The autofocus will be way better on the smartphone, especially if you want to like focus on objects and not people. Maybe this camera is pretty okay if you want to focus on people and there's only one person in the frame basically, then I think it's okay. But if you want to focus on objects, various objects, and get them in good focus, really the smartphone completely destroys this camera. Again, dynamic range is absolutely terrible on these Sony cameras, especially the ZV-1 when you compare to a smartphone. And yeah, pretty much exposure controls and even auto white balance really on this camera, it completely sucks really to a smartphone. So Sony should do much better when it comes to the auto modes on their cameras when compared to smartphones. Really, again, to be completely honest, on auto mode, I think my smartphone can still also destroy the ZV-E10, so in pure auto mode. But really the ZV-1 is way worse than the ZV-E10. The ZV-E10 in auto mode I think is pretty acceptable. Still in some shots smartphone outperforms it, but really the ZV-1 smartphone, any modern smartphone, will completely destroy it. Mostly the only area where this camera actually is better when compared to smartphone is when you actually shoot people indoors. So if you maybe want to use this camera in a studio setup, then indeed this camera will actually be better, and of course you will be able to properly adjust all the settings on it. And yeah, I think in that like operation, this camera really is better than a smartphone, because smartphones, even the best smartphones currently, really can't properly expose you and can't get the best colors and basically the, like depth of field indoors basically. But outdoors, again, a smartphone completely destroys this. So this is much better if you wanted to use a studio camera with basically a studio lights. So this is where the smartphone will obviously lose, but this one will get you much better results. But again, if you do not plan to use for that, and maybe you want simply do this logging stuff where you record yourself, and yeah, so I think this camera, yeah, I think it's pointless pretty much when you compare it to smartphone. Only maybe the flippy screen is cool, but apart from that, the performance really on this camera is subpar. Also, another area where this ZV-1 camera actually kind of sucks is the internal microphone. So they have actually tried to include a bit better microphones in the ZV cameras, but I think they are still completely failing. And again, a smartphone will actually give you much better audio quality than the internal microphone on this camera. So really you will need to use an external microphone with this camera. So, and when I actually use external microphone, I still find you do get some background noises from this camera. So I do not think it has the best internal amps basically on this camera. So you do get some background noises even with a super high-end microphone. So on the ZV-E10, I can clearly tell that the audio quality recorded with external microphone is much better, and it does have like better preamps basically. So yeah, yeah, I can't really suggest you to get this camera unless you have a very specific purpose for it. But yeah, when it comes to studio camera usage, really just get the ZV-E10. So that has got APS-C size sensor, and really it's only like $100 more in new market. Maybe this is way cheaper in the used market. Again, I paid over a bit over only 200 euros for this thing. So, and you can't get a ZV-E10 for 200 euros basically. So you have to spend at least 550 at least. So this can be a very cheap camera if you find a good deal on these ones. You can't find such deals. Also, another way how Sony actually deceives you with the lens on this camera is actually the aperture rating. So as you can see, it has got 2.8 f2.8 at the highest end basically, but they don't really tell you that's only related to how much light can get in. When you actually consider all those crop factors, so and all the different sensor sizes, just how much smaller the sensor size is, the look, the bokeh effect look you can get from the 2.8 is like pretty much similar to the f5.6 on the like regular kit lenses from the APS-C size cameras. Again, f1.8 sounds absolutely great, but when you actually look deeper, due to the sensor size, again, it's very similar only to that f3.5 in regard how it actually looks like. So those f ratings are only again valid in just how much light it will get inside the sensor, and not how the bokeh will look like. So who is this camera actually for? So maybe if you really want a simple camera and you do not want like a smartphone with you and you need a very cheap compact camera, I think this is pretty okay camera. But really, if you actually need a really good performance, and if you're actually trying to make some money from this stuff, basically, if you want to like start a YouTube or like basically logs and do basically like content creation stuff, I would really forget about this camera. It's not worth it really, and get the ZV-E10 instead. Again, only around $100 more, and this is way more advanced camera with way better autofocus, much larger sensor, battery life is like insanely much better. So everything is way better on this ZV-E10 compared to the ZV-1. Really, if you want a small compact camera and you maybe don't have the best smartphone and you can get this for cheap, I think this camera is pretty good. I think the lens also is really good, so you can actually zoom in on it. By the way, also it does have clear image zoom, so yeah, you can zoom in quite far with this camera actually. So it's actually pretty good camera if you are simply a casual user and simply want a small, nice compact camera. I think it's actually good for that purpose. But again, if you're trying to make any money from it or maybe get the best quality possible, really forget about this camera and get the ZV-E10. That is absolutely amazing camera. Or simply stick with your smartphone till you have actually outgrown the capabilities of what it can do. For example, I pretty much shoot 90% of my videos on YouTube. I have like 5 different YouTube channels, and I shoot everything with a smartphone due to better workflow, and also the autofocus, like auto exposure and stuff like that. It's way better on smartphone. So really, I'm not even using these better cameras anyway most of the time. So really, if you are looking at this camera, really, before you purchase it, try to see how your smartphone can actually do that, and maybe try to learn a bit more of smartphone photography and really try to explore more and get more out of your current camera setup. This isn't an upgrade over a decent smartphone. So maybe if you have an old or very cheap smartphone, this will get a better result. But if you have one of those very modern smartphones, the higher end ones, completely useless camera. Anyway, good luck.